So moving on next, before we end up diving into the cranial cavity, why don't we have a look at the scalp and look at the layers it is comprised of. We can say in general the scalp will have 5 layers, right? So it'll consist of structures, for instance, skin and subcutaneous tissue that will cover your neurocranium from the superior nuchal lines, which are back here on the occipital bone, all the way to the supraorbital margins anteriorly, which belong to the frontal bone. On the lateral aspect, the scalp usually extends over the temporal fascia all the way to the zygomatic arches right here. So the scalp is going to be composed of 5 layers. I've put the layers in sequence here, and also if we have a look over here, we can see that there are the 5 layers highlighted for you. Of course, the first layer is going to be the skin. It's important to note, though, that the first 3 layers altogether are pretty much connected to each other, right? So that means if you had an accident where scalping will occur, well, you'd actually have the first 3 layers, the skin, connective tissue, and the aponeurosis, so tightly attached to each other that they will actually peel off together from the loose areolar connective tissue layer. Also, note please that if you read these letters in sequence, S-C-A-L-P, they actually do spell out the word scalp. So you can use that as a mnemonic or as a memory device to study the layers of the scalp better. In addition, you can see that posteriorly here, the skin on the occipital region will contain a lot of sweat and sebaceous glands and hair follicles. It has an abundant arterial supply and a good venous and lymphatic drainage. Then you have the connective tissue layer. That is a dense subcutaneous layer of fat and fibrous tissue that is just below the skin. We can see a little bit more of it here, this yellowy appearing substance. This will also contain the nerves and the vessels that supply your scalp. The third layer, or the A, is the A in aponeurosis. It's also called Galea aponeurotica, or the epicranial aponeurosis. This is a really strong tendinous sheath, and you can see that it expands all the way anteriorly and merges with the frontalis belly, and then goes all the way posteriorly to then merge with the occipitalis. Sometimes people also refer to the muscles together as the occipitofrontalis, which kind of makes sense as they are both embedded in or connected to the same epicranial aponeurosis. And then deep to the aponeurosis, which is highlighted now, you would have this loose areolar connective tissue layer, which, as I said earlier, is actually the plane, that separation between the upper 3 layers and the layer below would actually happen. That is the scalping plane, sometimes also referred to as the danger zone, because in this layer we can also find some emissary veins which provide a conduit through which infections can potentially spread into the cranium. And the last layer is going to be the pericranium. It's not indicated here, but that will be just deep to your loose areolar connective tissue layer. The pericranium is then a very dense layer of connective tissue that will form the outside of the periosteum. Remember that periosteum, the name's the game, means adjacent to the bone. The periosteum of the neurocranium is formed by the pericranium. This is really quite firmly attached to the calvaria, but if you lift it up a little bit, you can peel it off of the bone of the skull. Except for the regions where we have our sutures. Remember that we have several quite prominent sutures. Here's a little bit of your sagittal suture. Then back here, deep to the muscle here, we should have our lambdoid suture. Remember the places here are named. This is the lambda, and further anteriorly, where the coronal suture should be meeting the superior, or actually the sagittal suture, that would be the bregma. See, the bregma would be this region right here. All in all, the layers of the scalp, from superficial to deep: skin, connective tissue, aponeurosis. These 3 layers are attached firmly to each other. L, as in loose areolar connective tissue layer, and P, the pericranium. Now let's have a look at the cranium. If you've already watched the osteology videos from an earlier module, you probably already know all of this. However, we're going to have a look at this and go through pretty quickly. First of all, we should know that the cranium consists of two different parts, structurally and functionally. You have the neurocranium and the visceral cranium. So the neurocranium is kind of like a dome or a roof. It has the calvaria, which is the skull cap, and has a floor, which is described as the cranial base. The neurocranium is also formed by 8 bones. You can see them listed here and this little list here. However, 4 of those bones are going to be single bones. That's, for instance, the frontal bone, ethmoid bone, the sphenoid bone, the occipital bone, and there are 2 sets of bones that occur bilaterally. That will be, for instance, your temporal bone. You have one on this side and one, of course, on the other side, and your parietal bones here and on the other side as well. So now we'll have a look at the visceral cranium. So the visceral cranium is going to contain all the bones that will make up your anterior and the lower regions of your skull. So that'll include, for instance, your mandible, we can see right here, the vomer, the inferior nasal conchae. Be aware that there are 2 of these, one on the left and one on the right side. There are 2 nasal bones, one on the right and one on the left, the 2 maxillae, the zygomatic bones, and the lacrimal bones. Fast review: neurocranium, frontal bone, parietal bone, there are 2 of these, 2 temporal bones, 1 sphenoid bone, 1 ethmoid bone, and 1 occipital bone. The visceral cranium has 2 lacrimal bones, 2 nasal bones, 1 vomer, 2 zygomatic bones, 2 inferior nasal conchae, 2 maxillae, and 1 mandible.